Get out, maid. Don't ruin my perfect wedding." The words cut right through the suffocating scent of white lilies and gardenias. Then came the shock of ice-cold Pinot Noir soaking through the burgundy silk of my dress, sticking the heavy fabric instantly to my skin. Kylie stood only inches away, holding her empty crystal wine glass at a deliberate tilt. A final drop of dark red liquid gathered at the rim and fell onto the pristine white marble floor. I looked at my 31-year-old sister. She wore a custom-beaded gown paid for by someone else's money, and her jaw was set in that familiar, defiant angle she used whenever she expected me to clean up her mess. For nearly 2 decades, I had been the one to fix things for our family. But, at 39 years old, as the executive director of Harbor Light Women's Resource Center, I had spent the last 18 months building a life that did not revolve around saving Kylie. A heavy, suffocating silence settled over the 200 guests seated beneath the vaulted glass roof of the Botanical Conservatory. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a steady red blink. The videographer's camera was still rolling, capturing every second of this calculated humiliation. And sitting in the third row, watching this entire spectacle unfold, was Denise Harper, the program officer for a charitable foundation that was about to give my sister $250,000. If I reacted, if I raised my voice, or slapped the expensive glass out of her hand, I would give Kylie exactly what she wanted. I would become the bitter, jealous, older sister trying to steal the spotlight on her special day. I let the cold wine drip from my hem onto my shoes. I smiled at the bride, and I kept my voice perfectly level. Fine. I turned my back on the altar. I did not ask the coordinator for a napkin, and I did not apologize to the staring guests I passed. I simply reached into my leather purse and closed my fingers around the thick, cream-colored envelope waiting at the bottom. That envelope held a legal notice, reviewed by my board's attorney exactly 10 days ago. My heels clicked against the marble as I walked down the center aisle. Halfway to the exit, my father leaned out from the front row. The smell of scotch and peppermint rolled off him before he even opened his mouth. "Claire, don't make this worse," Daniel whispered, his face tight with panic. I did not break my stride. I kept walking toward the arched glass doors at the back of the venue, eager to reach the quiet of the hallway. Behind me, a sharp metallic clink echoed against the wood of a mahogany chair. It was the sound of Rachel Monroe, the maid of honor, setting her massive cascade of white roses on the empty seat beside her. A brass key dangled from her clutch, catching the late afternoon light filtering through the glass ceiling. I paused near the exit and turned around. Rachel looked at the puddle of wine spreading across the floor, and then she looked directly at Kylie. "Find someone else to stand beside you," Rachel said. Her voice was remarkably steady for a woman who used to flinch at loud noises. Kylie's perfectly contoured face went pale. She gripped her veil with manicured fingers. "Rachel, get back in line right now. Do not do this to me." "Claire came when I called," Rachel replied, picking up her small purse. "You didn't." A ripple of hushed whispers swept through the seated guests. Kylie spun toward the other 4 women in matching blush dresses, her panic rapidly morphing into open rage. "If any of you take one step, you are completely cut out of my life," Kylie snapped. "I mean it." Erin Caldwell did not even wait for the bride to finish her threat. The school counselor stepped down from the raised platform and dropped her bouquet onto the floor. Natalie Ortiz followed, quietly unpinning the floral corsage from her wrist and leaving it on the altar steps. Monica Hayes hesitated for a long moment, looking out at the hundreds of staring faces, but then she took a deep breath and walked away. Whitney Shaw was the last one left. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her professional makeup, but her movements were completely deliberate. She placed her flowers carefully on the ground, turned her back on her oldest friend, and joined the others. No one shouted. No one made a grand, dramatic speech. They simply walked away, leaving Kylie standing completely alone at the altar of her perfect wedding. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors and stepped into the air-conditioned quiet of the side corridor. I thought the bridesmaids would stay in the main lobby, but a few seconds later, the rhythmic sound of 5 pairs of heels echoed against the tile behind me. I turned to face them. Rachel's brass key jingled again as she shifted her weight. "You need to go back," I told them, keeping my voice low. "Do not let her make you decide your whole lives right now." I didn't ask you to do this. Rachel stepped forward. You didn't ask us. That is exactly why it matters. I looked at these 5 women. 3 years ago, I had driven across 2 counties in the middle of the night to pull Rachel out of a house she was terrified to leave. I had given her that brass key so she would always have a safe place to sleep at my townhouse. I knew their histories, and I knew what they were risking by walking away from the center of Kylie's social universe. I took a breath, trying to process the magnitude of what had just happened, while my hand remained firmly wrapped around the envelope in my bag. Before I could say another word, a woman appeared at the far end of the hallway. It was Denise Harper. She had slipped out a side door during the commotion, and her expression was strictly professional. Denise walked up to our group and nodded politely to the bridesmaids before turning her focus entirely on me. She did not accuse anyone, and she did not mention the wine incident. Claire, Denise said, her tone pleasant but firm. I am sorry to interrupt, but I was actually hoping to catch you before the ceremony began. I wanted to ask you about the partnership between Harbor Light and Women Rise. I let go of the envelope and met her gaze. There is no partnership, Denise. Harbor Light operates completely independently. Denise paused. She reached into her blazer pocket, pulled out her phone, and opened a digital document. The screen glowed in the dim light of the corridor. Then I am a little confused, Denise said, swiping to the final page. She turned the screen toward me. I recognized the letterhead of my sister's charity, but my eyes immediately dropped to the bottom right corner of the document. There, sitting cleanly on the page, was my full name. Next to it was my signature. I recognized the loops of my own handwriting instantly, but I had never seen this document in my life. The air in the hallway suddenly felt very thin. Kylie had not just thrown wine on me to humiliate me. She had done it to force me out of the room before this exact conversation could happen. Denise held the phone steady. Then I need you to explain why your signature is on our agreement. 6 weeks before Denise Harper cornered me in that glass hallway, I woke up in a house that belonged entirely to me. Sunlight warmed the hardwood floors of my townhouse, and the coffee machine hummed a quiet, steady rhythm in the kitchen. I sat at the island counter, reviewing my automatic mortgage payment on my laptop. For 18 months, my finances had been completely separated from my family. I did not pay for my sister's emergencies anymore, and I no longer managed my father's mounting debts. My phone buzzed against the granite countertop. A new voicemail notification popped up on the screen, carrying Daniel's familiar number. I pressed play, listening to the heavy sigh that always preceded a request for money. Claire, your sister's car insurance bounced again. My father's recorded voice filled the quiet kitchen. Just cover it this once. You know how stressed she is about the wedding. I did not call him back. Since I had closed our joint accounts, Kylie had maintained her image as a young activist through sporadic social media sponsorships, maxed credit cards, and whatever cash our father could scrape together. I tapped the screen, exporting the audio file to a designated folder on my hard drive. It was just another quiet boundary, another piece of evidence that I no longer subsidized her illusions. An hour later, I parked my car at the Harbor Light Women's Resource Center. The front office smelled of fresh printer ink and the cheap vanilla coffee our staff loved. I walked past the intake desks, settling into my role as executive director. I was not a bleeding heart who ran on pure emotion. I managed a board of directors, enforced strict organizational policies, and balanced a tight budget. Midway through the morning, my program manager handed me a request for emergency funds that fell outside our approved guidelines. The client's story was heartbreaking, and a younger version of me would have written a personal check on the spot. We cannot approve this, I told the manager, handing the file back across my desk. If we break the disbursement rules for one case, we risk our compliance for the entire housing grant. Give her the referrals for the state program. Protecting the system mattered more than playing the hero. That same discipline kept my hands steady when my inbox chimed with an email from Grantwell Community Foundation. The message was from Denise Harper. She introduced herself, praised our center's work, and casually asked me to verify our new joint initiative with Women Rise. According to her notes, my sister's charity had submitted a proposal claiming our organizations shared a transitional housing program. Denise even referenced our specific client outcome data, noting how impressive our success rates were. I read the email twice. I did not draft a furious text to my sister, nor did I storm out of my office to demand answers. Instead, I forwarded the message to my board chair and our legal counsel with a single sentence noting a potential unauthorized use of our metrics. Then, I politely replied to Denise, requesting a copy of the grant packet for my records. While I waited for the foundation to respond, I opened our secure server and pulled up the draft version of Harbor Light's annual report. My sister still had an old media access login from a brief period she had helped with our social accounts. I scrolled through the pages of our internal data until I found a specific chart detailing our employment placement statistics. There was a typo in the draft. The chart read 68%, an error my team had caught and corrected to 66% before the final publication. When Denise's office forwarded a summary of Kylie's grant application later that afternoon, I opened the attachment. Right there on page 4, under the bright logo of Women Rise, was the stolen statistic. 68%. It was a digital fingerprint left behind by a thief who had not bothered to read carefully. I took a screenshot, exported the server access logs, and placed the files into my secure evidence folder. I picked up my phone and dialed my sister's number. Kylie answered on the second ring, surrounded by the loud, echoing chatter of a floral shop. "I saw the grant packet you submitted to Grantwell," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "You need to remove our logo and our data immediately." A sharp, dismissive laugh came through the speaker. "Claire, calm down. It is just a working draft for internal review. You always get so jealous whenever I try to build something for myself." "It is not a draft if it is sitting on a foundation officer's desk," I replied. "Look, I do not have time for a business lecture today," Kylie snapped, her voice dropping into a patronizing register. "Just make sure you arrive at the venue early next month. I need you to help with the family things before the photographer arrives." "I am attending as a guest," I told her. "I am not your event staff." I ended the call before she could argue. Leaning back in my office chair, I opened a new folder on my desktop, naming it with the current date. I dropped in the emails, the board minutes, and the server logs, building a clean, undeniable timeline of events. I had a life of my own, a budget for my upcoming vacation, and a career I had built from nothing. I was not going to let her tear it down. My computer chimed with one final email from Denise. It contained the full legal attachment of the grant submission, including the Memorandum of Understanding. I clicked the file open and scrolled down to the final page. The document laid out a comprehensive financial partnership between Harbor Light and Women Rise, binding our resources together. At the bottom right corner, above a printed line with my executive title, sat a signature. I zoomed in on the dark blue ink. A tiny white space broke the loop of the letter C, a distinct skip in my favorite pen that I remembered perfectly from a stack of annual thank you letters I had signed months ago. Kylie had scanned one of those letters, cropped out my name, and pasted it onto a fraudulent contract. The signature was mine. The permission was not. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, and Rachel slipped into the booth across from me, wrapping both hands around a ceramic mug. I watched the steam curl upward, deciding exactly how much to say. "Did you give Kylie permission to use your story for the foundation grant?" I asked. Rachel frowned, her brow creasing over the rim of her cup as she answered. "I signed a release for an internal workshop last year. Just my first name. No identifying details." I stirred my black coffee, letting the silence do the heavy lifting. Recognition hit Rachel's eyes, wide and sudden. 3 years had passed since the night she finally left a house that had become a cage. And the memory still hung between us. She had called my sister first, hoping for a lifeline. Kylie had answered the phone, listened to the panic, and calmly explained that she had a promotional photo shoot at 8 in the morning and needed her sleep. Then Rachel called me. I drove across 2 county lines in the pouring rain, making sure to park 3 blocks away from her address. I did not kick down doors or start a screaming match on a suburban lawn, because rage rarely helps a victim escape. Following the strict advice of a domestic violence advocate, I kept local police on standby, got Rachel into the passenger seat, and drove straight to the hospital. For the next 4 months, she slept in my spare bedroom. On her first morning at the townhouse, I placed a heavy brass key on the kitchen counter, telling her she never had to knock and she never had to ask permission to enter a safe space again. Rachel set her mug down hard enough to rattle the saucer, pulling us back to the present. If she put my full name in a public grant deck, I swear to God. Claire, I owe you my life, but I will not let her do this. You do not owe me your life, I said, leaning forward to keep my voice low. You walked out of that house on your own 2 feet, and I just drove the car. That same evening, 5 women gathered around a corner table at a quiet Italian restaurant downtown. Whitney pushed her pasta around her plate, actively avoiding eye contact with the rest of the group. She did not share a dramatic rescue story, but she had spent the last decade watching my sister break things and waiting for me to sweep up the glass. We want to stand up there because we keep hoping the girl we knew in high school will come back, Whitney admitted, her voice thick with guilt. Rachel picked up her phone and dialed the bride right there at the table. She did not ask for privacy, choosing instead to tell Kylie flatly that I would sit at the family table, I would not be managing vendor emergencies, and I would be treated as a guest. The tinny sound of Kylie's voice bled through the receiver, calling me overly sensitive and dramatic, but she quickly agreed just to end the uncomfortable conversation. I looked around the table at these women, taking in their tired expressions and torn loyalties. Do not walk out of this wedding for me, I told them, making sure my tone was absolutely clear. Whatever you decide to do on Sunday, it has to be about what you are willing to accept from her, not about protecting me. The next morning, I sat in the polished conference room of Harbor Lights legal counsel. My attorney slid a crisp document across the mahogany table, presenting a formal notice of cease and desist. The paperwork explicitly stated that no partnership existed and demanded the immediate removal of our trademarked logo and private data. I folded the thick paper, slid it into a cream envelope, and placed it securely in my purse. If Kylie did not retract the grant application by Sunday morning, I planned to hand the envelope directly to her after the ceremony ended. My phone vibrated against the leather armrest. Denise had replied to my latest email, confirming she was attending the wedding as a guest of the groom's family and hoping to catch up with me near the altar. A second notification popped up immediately after. Rachel had forwarded an email from the bridal group thread, adding no extra commentary. I opened the message, scrolling past my sister's name to a directive typed out for the entire bridal party to see. Keep Claire away from Denise until after the ceremony. She likes to turn everything into business. I locked my phone screen, feeling a strange sense of clarity wash over me. Kylie was not afraid I would ruin her wedding. She was afraid I would answer one question. Arriving at the Riverside Botanical Conservatory in Richmond, the thick Virginia humidity clung to the glass walls. The air inside smelled heavily of blooming jasmine, roasted cedar, and expensive catering. I parked my car precisely at 6 in the evening. I refused to show up 3 hours early to arrange place cards, despite the frantic voicemails my sister had left that morning. Wearing a simple navy cocktail dress and carrying only a small clutch, I stepped into the grand foyer. Kylie immediately spotted me from across the room. The bride wore a white silk rehearsal gown, her hair swept into an elaborate updo. She marched across the marble floor, thrusting a printed list of vendor contacts toward my chest. "You are late," Kylie said. "The florist is confused about the centerpieces, and the caterer needs someone to recount the vegetarian plates before dinner starts." I stepped back. The paper fluttered onto the polished floor between us. "Ask your planner, Kylie. Marla is paid a very high retainer to handle event logistics." My sister stared at me, her mouth parting in genuine shock. For years, I had always taken the clipboard. I had always handled the crisis. Not tonight. Before the argument could escalate, my father materialized beside us. Daniel smelled of aged bourbon and cheap peppermint. He put a heavy hand on my shoulder, leaning in close with that familiar, pleading expression. "Claire, please, just help your sister out," Daniel whispered. "It is a highly stressful day, and she does not have a mother here to manage these things." I looked at the man who had checked out of parenting almost 2 decades ago, leaving me to raise his youngest daughter. "We both lost our mother," I told him, keeping my voice soft and completely steady. but only one of us was ever asked to replace her. I gently removed his hand from my shoulder, turned my back on both of them, and walked toward the dining area. Passing the catering kitchen, a frantic conversation caught my attention. Marla, the wedding planner, stood near a stack of silver serving trays. She held a thick binder open, looking completely exhausted. "Kylie, I cannot simply alter the billing description," Marla said, her tone sharp and exasperated. "Why do you want me to change a bridal floral installation to community launch decor?" My sister turned the corner, spotting me lingering near the doorway. Kylie immediately snapped the binder shut. The bride grabbed the wedding planner by the arm, dragging her further down the hall, and loudly changing the subject to seating arrangements. I did not follow them. I did not need to steal documents or dig through private folders. My brain simply filed away the date, the vendor name, and the planner's deeply nervous expression. Something incredibly reckless was happening with the event finances. Walking into the main dining room, a hired string quartet was already playing in the corner. Denise Harper stood near the head table, holding a glass of sparkling water. The foundation officer smiled warmly as I approached, but before I could return the greeting, Kylie suddenly appeared at my side. My sister linked her arm through mine, her grip tight enough to bruise my skin. "Denise, I am so glad you could make it," Kylie gushed, displaying a picture-perfect smile. "Claire and I are just thrilled about finalizing our joint partnership next week." I opened my mouth to correct the lie. Before the words could form, a groomsman bumped into Denise, profusely apologizing and pulling the foundation officer into a loud conversation about airport traffic. Kylie immediately dropped the fake smile, dragging me behind a towering floral arrangement. "Do not make a scene," Kylie hissed, her fingers still digging into my forearm. "You are not going to embarrass me in front of these guests." "I will not make a scene," I replied, pulling my arm free. "But when she asks me a direct question, I will tell the absolute truth." Kylie glared at me, her eyes narrowing into cold, furious slits. "After tomorrow, everyone will finally know who actually built something and who just kept cleaning up." I did not argue. I simply walked away, mentally confirming that the cream envelope was safely tucked inside the purse I planned to carry the next day. Across the crowded venue, my phone vibrated in my clutch. I ignored the initial call, assuming it was another vendor complaint from my father. A minute later, a text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Rachel. According to her rapid text bubbles, the maid of honor had slipped into the bridal suite to grab a fresh coat of lipstick. Sitting on a velvet ottoman, my sister had carelessly left out a printed slide presentation designed for the post-wedding charity brunch. Rachel had snapped a photograph of the third page and sent it directly to me. I stood in the quiet corner of the dining room and zoomed in on the digital image. The slide featured a high-resolution picture of Rachel, alongside her full legal name and explicit details of the abuse she had suffered 3 years ago. The words blurred for a second as an old protective anger flared in my chest. Under Rachel's photograph, Kylie had written 3 words. "I saved her." By the time the wedding morning arrived, every safeguard was already in place. The files were backed up, the board meeting was scheduled, and the cream envelope in my purse contained the formal notice Kylie had ignored. I attended as a guest, not as the unpaid crisis manager she still expected me to be. Shortly before the ceremony, Denise Harper approached my seat and mentioned the ambitious partnership between Harbor Light and Women Rise. "There is no partnership," I told her. Kylie heard me. I watched the panic flash across her face as Denise reached for her phone. Kylie knew that one direct question would expose the forged agreement before the foundation approved her grant. She grabbed a glass of wine from a passing tray, demanded that I fix her train, and poured the drink over me when I refused. The camera captured what happened next. I said, "Fine," and walked away. Rachel placed her bouquet down first. Aaron followed. Then Natalie, Monica, and finally Whitney stepped away from the altar by their own choice. Denise did not return to her seat. She showed the agreement to Evan and explained that the grant process had to be suspended until the signature could be verified. Kylie claimed I had signed the document and changed my mind to sabotage her. I stepped back into the doorway. "I never signed it." Evan stared at the signature, then at the woman standing alone beneath the flowers. "What did you do, sign in Claire's name?" "The ceremony is over," Evan said. His voice clipped and devoid of any warmth. He did not look like a man devastated by heartbreak. He looked like a man who had narrowly escaped a disaster. He carefully unpinned the boutonniere from his tuxedo jacket, placing the flower on the altar beside the discarded bouquets. Kylie stood paralyzed in her white silk, the fabric draped over her shoulders like a shroud. She watched the groom walk away without a backward glance. The officiant quickly closed the marriage license folder, confirming that no legal union had been established. My father rushed across the aisle, his face flushed a deep, panicked red. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the side of the stage. "Claire, stop this right now," Daniel hissed, his breath thick with the smell of scotch and desperation. "Tell Denise, it was just a misunderstanding. If you destroy this wedding, you destroy everything." I reached into my clutch and pulled out the cream-colored envelope. I did not raise my voice, and I did not let him shake my resolve. "Look at the date on this notice, Dad," I said, holding the paper up so he could see the lawyer's timestamp from 10 days ago. This began long before she decided to throw wine on me in front of 200 guests. Daniel stared at the paper, his hands trembling as he realized I had been prepared for weeks. "She will lose everything," he whispered, as if he were the one who had been wronged. "Then she should have stopped before she used what was not hers," I replied. Behind us, a young man with a heavy camera rig approached, looking deeply uncomfortable. He shifted the weight of his equipment. "I still have the raw footage," the videographer said, glancing nervously at my sister. "I am not editing anything out, and I am not giving the master file to anyone until your legal counsel clears it." I nodded, feeling a strange sense of calm. "Keep the raw file safe. My attorney will be in touch." Marla, the wedding planner, stepped out from behind a floral pillar. Her face was pale, and she seemed to be holding her binder like a shield. She looked at me, then at the mess on the floor, and finally at Kylie. "I did not change the original invoices," Marla told me, her voice barely audible over the low murmur of the confused guests. She kept asking for revised descriptions to hide the expenses. I kept every single email and the original, unaltered bills. I reached out, taking the business card Marla extended. It was a lifeline from the unexpected. Suddenly, my phone vibrated, lighting up with a call from Ellen Ward, the treasurer of the charity my sister had founded. I excused myself and stepped out into the quiet of the foyer, pressing the device to my ear. "Claire," Ellen said, her voice tight and professional. "We just finished a preliminary sweep of the ledger, and I have found something very disturbing. 2 of the transactions are explicitly labeled as Harbor Light Joint Outreach Launch and Harbor Light Partner Hospitality. We never received those funds, and we certainly never partnered on those events." I walked toward the window, looking out at the calm, dark water of the river. "I am locking her access to the accounts right now," Ellen continued, her voice gaining strength. "I can see the trail of these expenses. She was trying to pay for wedding deposits, florist fees, and resort costs using the donation funds." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, creating a picture of systematic fraud hidden behind the guise of a nonprofit mission. "Ellen, can you hold everything in a secure log?" I asked. "I already have," Ellen replied. "But I have to ask you one thing, and I need the truth." Ellen lowered her voice. "Claire, why did a women's charity pay the florist who built your sister's altar?" The emergency meeting of the Women Rise Board took place in a sterile, windowless conference room 3 days after the aborted wedding. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Ellen Ward, the independent treasurer, placed a thick binder in front of each board member. She did not waste time with pleasantries. "We have identified 5 specific transactions that deviate significantly from our approved mission," Ellen said, her voice echoing in the quiet space. She pointed to a line item on the projection screen. 2 of these payments are labeled as Harbor Light Joint Outreach Launch and Harbor Light Partner Hospitality. We have confirmed with Claire Bennett that Harbor Light never received these funds, never partnered on these events, and never authorized the use of their name. Kylie sat across from me, wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit that screamed corporate professionalism. She crossed her legs and offered the board a small, victimized smile. "These were internal mislabelings," Kylie said, her tone smooth and practiced. "Our bookkeeper was overwhelmed by the launch. It was a simple administrative error, not a misappropriation of funds." I did not let her tone rattle me. I did not make a scene. If it was a simple error, Kylie, why was the money transferred to a luxury resort and a high-end florist on the exact day of your wedding deposits? I asked, my voice remaining perfectly level. My sister glared at me, her eyes flashing with venom. I do not have to defend myself against a sister who has been trying to sabotage my career since the day I started this organization. Ellen did not let her deflect. The treasurer flipped to the section detailing the vendor matches. The florist invoice for the wedding, which was paid directly by the charity, is labeled in our ledger as Community Event Coordination. When we contacted the vendor, they provided the original, unaltered invoice, which clearly lists the service as bridal installation. Kylie's face tightened. She looked toward the door, clearly searching for an exit strategy that did not involve admitting to fraud. I delegated the bookkeeping, Kylie argued, her voice rising in pitch. I was focused on the actual charitable work. I cannot be held responsible for what a junior staffer typed into a spreadsheet. I remained silent, letting the evidence speak for itself. My presence there was only to confirm that my organization had no partnership with hers. The board members exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to see the pattern of deception, even if they were terrified of the scandal that would follow. The board voted unanimously to suspend Kylie's financial access pending a full forensic audit. As the meeting broke up, she stormed out of the room, leaving her expensive leather briefcase behind. I walked out into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling a strange sense of detachment. My phone buzzed in my bag, but I ignored it. I was halfway to my car when Daniel intercepted me near the fountain. He looked haggard, his suit jacket wrinkled as if he had been wearing it for days. "Claire, just stop the audit," he whispered, looking over his shoulder as if someone were watching us. "If you agree to pay the $63,000 back into the account, they will drop the investigation. Kylie can just resign and walk away quietly. Please, do not let her go to prison." I stopped walking and looked at him. "Paying the money back does not fix the forged signature on the grant agreement, Dad. It does not fix the fact that she used a victim's trauma for her own brand. I am not going to clean this up for her." "She is your sister," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "She has been using me to avoid consequences for 20 years, I replied. "That ends today." I turned away from him and walked to my car, locking the doors behind me. I had to stop at the grocery store on the way home, a mundane task that felt surreal after the high-stakes atmosphere of the morning. While standing in the checkout line, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an alert from my attorney regarding a formal cease and desist letter sent by Kylie's lawyer. The letter contained a long list of accusations, claiming I had defamed her and intentionally interfered with her professional reputation. I did not forward it to my friends or post about it on social media. I simply sent it to my legal team with the time-stamped documents of the warnings I had given her weeks before the wedding. A ping echoed from my bag, signaling a new email notification. It was from Marla, the wedding planner. I tapped the screen and opened the message, my heart skipping a beat as I read the text she had finally recovered from her deleted items folder. Kylie had sent the instructions clearly, leaving no room for a defense of accidental mislabeling. "Don't use the word wedding," my sister had written in the message. "Call it the Women Rise launch event, and make sure the invoice doesn't mention a ceremony." The message was only one sentence long, but it turned a bad expense into a deliberate lie. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot, staring at the screen until the text blurred. It was the clearest proof so far that the false descriptions had been deliberate. She had not been overwhelmed or confused. She had been meticulously crafting a web of deception, thinking she was clever enough to outrun the truth. My hands were steady as I saved the file. I was not the victim of a jealous sister anymore. I was no longer trying to convince anyone with emotion. I was preserving the evidence that would allow independent investigators to reach their own conclusion. Kylie launched her counteroffensive 3 days after the board suspended her financial access. She did not release the financial documents she had promised to clarify, nor did she issue an apology to her donors. Instead, she posted a heavily edited video to her public social media channels. The clip began abruptly, showing the exact moment the bridesmaids stepped down from the altar. It was framed to make it look as though I had signaled them to leave, casting me as a controlling, jealous sister who could not stand to see her have a moment of happiness. The caption was filled with carefully curated language about trauma and resilience, calling me obsessed and manipulative. Within an hour, anonymous accounts began commenting on the Harbor Light social media pages, demanding to know why we were attacking a fellow women's organization. My office phone started ringing off the hook. Donors who had supported us for years were suddenly asking if we had initiated a smear campaign against my own sister. I sat at my desk, watching the numbers climb. Each comment felt like a physical weight, but I refused to take the bait. I did not log into my personal accounts, and I did not engage with the trolls who were clearly being directed by someone with a script. The Harbor Light Board of Directors held an emergency session that afternoon. They were terrified. One of the newer board members looked at me with genuine apprehension. "Claire, we have to respond," she said, her voice strained. "If we do not clarify that we have no partnership with her, our reputation is going to be dragged through the mud." "We will respond," I told them, keeping my expression neutral. "But we are not going to fight her on her terms. We are not going to turn this into a public argument about family drama. We will issue one statement. Harbor Light has never entered into a partnership with Women Rise, and we are working with our legal counsel to ensure the confidentiality of our clients remains protected." The board agreed. We published the statement on our official website, leaving it there without further comment. By refusing to engage in the mudslinging, we robbed Kylie of the emotional reaction she needed to keep the narrative focused on me rather than her own actions. While the public drama intensified, Rachel came to see me at the townhouse. She looked exhausted, her eyes rimmed with red, but she was resolute. "I have spoken to the attorney," Rachel said, sitting on the sofa where she had spent those long months of recovery. "I want to go public. I want to tell everyone what she did with my story. If I speak up, people will know she lied." I felt a surge of protectiveness that had nothing to do with saving my sister. "Rachel, she will try to tear your reputation apart. She will call you unstable, and she will twist every word you say. Are you doing this because you want to, or because you feel like you owe me for what happened 3 years ago?" Rachel looked at her hands, then back up at me, her resolve hardening. "I am doing it because she took something that belonged to me and sold it to build a life she did not earn. It is not about you. It is about the truth. Then do not live stream it," I said gently. "Do not give her an audience. Provide a sworn statement to the investigators who are already looking into the foundation. Let the truth come out through the legal system, where she cannot edit the footage or delete the comments." Rachel nodded, agreeing that a formal statement was the only path that wouldn't turn her trauma into a spectator sport for the internet. A week later, our legal counsel met with the videographer who had shot the wedding. We sat in a quiet, private screening room to review the raw footage. The screen flickered to life, showing the entire conservatory in high definition. The clip Kylie had posted was there, but the raw file showed everything she had cut out. On the screen, I watched Kylie march toward me, the wine glass held in a tight, deliberate grip. She did not stumble. She did not look at me with sadness. She leaned in, her eyes flat and cold, and poured the drink directly onto my dress while Denise Harper was sitting only a few feet away. I did not signal the bridesmaids. I did not even look at them. I had simply turned and walked away. The board representative let out a long breath. "She orchestrated the entire thing," he whispered. "I know," I said, "but we are not putting this on the internet. We are keeping it as part of the case file." The weight of the video felt like a weapon, and for the first time, I understood that I did not need to use it to win. I just needed to ensure that it was available when the right people asked to see it. Evan, the groom who had left Kylie at the altar, contacted my attorney the following day. He had been staying with his parents, trying to navigate the fallout of a marriage that had evaporated in seconds. He was willing to provide an email he had discovered in a shared folder while he was packing his things. "It was just sitting there," Evan explained during a brief phone call. "She had written it to her PR assistant. It was a direct order to keep you away from Denise until the grant paperwork was cleared." He sent the email, and reading it felt like looking at a map of a disaster that had been planned months in advance. She had not been afraid of a family scene. She had been terrified that I would blow the whistle on the fraud before the money hit her account. My attorney gathered all of it, placing the time-stamped warnings I had sent weeks before the wedding alongside the new evidence from Evan. The inconsistencies were mounting, creating a timeline that showed my sister had been operating under the assumption that she was untouchable. Weeks passed in a blur of meetings, statements, and silence. I went to work. I managed my staff. I went home to my townhouse and slept through the night. The smear campaign eventually died out because I refused to feed it, and the public interest moved on to the next tragedy. Exactly 9 weeks after the wedding, I was in my office reviewing a budget proposal when my phone rang. It was an investigator from the state office that oversaw charitable solicitation. "Miss Bennett," the investigator said, his tone clipped and professional. "We have finished our initial sweep of the documentation related to the Women Rise grant applications. We have several questions, and we would like you to identify the specific document that carried your stolen signature." I looked out at the parking lot, watching the sun hit the pavement. The battle was no longer a matter of opinion or social media posts. It was a legal process. "I can be there in 20 minutes, I said. I picked up my bag and walked out the door, ready to finish what she had started. The special review session for Women Rise was held in a plain conference room at the organization's attorney's office. The board members sat around a long table with the audit report, grant records, and written statements arranged in front of them. My sister arrived early, dressed in a sharp professional suit that was meant to project an image of a focused executive unfairly targeted by a personal vendetta. She sat beside her attorney at one end of the table, a fountain pen poised between her fingers, as if professional posture alone could restore the authority the board had already suspended. The board members looked exhausted, their eyes shifting between the stacks of paperwork and the woman they had trusted for months. Ellen, Women Rise's independent treasurer, did not offer any opening pleasantries. She simply gestured to the projector, which displayed the audit summary. "We are here to address the discrepancies found in the fiscal year records," Ellen said. "These 5 specific transactions indicate a clear pattern of misappropriation. Specifically, we are looking at the payments made to the florist, the videographer, and the travel agency, all of which were labeled as charitable outreach." Kylie stood up, smoothing her skirt with slow, deliberate movements. She looked at each board member in turn, her voice perfectly modulated to sound like a calm, reasonable leader. "I have already explained that our bookkeeper was under immense pressure during the launch phase. Administrative errors are not evidence of malice. I have dedicated my life to helping women rise, and the suggestion that I would steal from the very people I support is a grotesque misunderstanding of how complex nonprofit accounting works." I sat at the end of the table listening to her perform. She had always been a master of framing herself as the victim, turning every failure into an attack on her character. I did not raise my voice. I did not interrupt her monologue, even when she began to imply that my own organization had pressured the treasurer into conducting this audit to settle a sibling rivalry. "If it was merely an administrative error," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, effectively silencing the room, "then why did you request that the wedding planner change the descriptions on the original invoices?" Kylie's hand tightened around her pen. "I never requested that. Marla is disgruntled because I chose not to extend her contract after the event. The original invoices tell a different story," I said. I slid a copy of the recovered emails across the table, the time-stamped messages from my sister clearly visible. "Those invoices contain your specific instructions to hide the word wedding and replace it with language that would trick the treasurer into believing the expenses were legitimate outreach activities." A heavy silence fell over the room as the board members passed the printed emails among themselves. My sister's composure fractured. She scanned the room for a sympathetic face, but found only the cold, hard reality of the documentation. Then, the Grant Foundation's legal representative stepped forward. He placed a thick file on the table, centering it before the board chair. "We have reviewed the Memorandum of Understanding submitted by Women Rise. The document was generated from the digital account belonging to your sister, and the signature was proven to be a cropped image taken from a letter she sent to a donor several months prior. This is not an administrative error. This is fraud." Kylie turned toward me, her eyes burning with raw, unfiltered fury. "You have been obsessed with taking me down for years. You were always jealous that I built something people actually wanted to hear about. You just could not stand the thought that I was more successful than you." "I was never jealous of your success," I replied, feeling a sudden, strange sense of liberation. I was only ever protecting the people you used as props for your life. The treasurer then flipped to a slide displaying a side-by-side comparison of the charity's annual reports. One chart showed an employment placement rate of 66%, the correct figure that my team had finalized. The slide right next to it showed Kylie's grant application, which touted an employment rate of 68%. It was a minuscule discrepancy to the untrained eye, but it proved that she had accessed our internal draft files and copied the numbers without checking their accuracy. "That was a draft," Kylie snapped, though her voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Everyone uses drafts for projection. It was a mistake." "It was a signature of theft," I said. "You were so desperate to inflate your impact that you didn't even notice you were copying a typo." The board members looked down at their binders, the weight of the evidence becoming impossible to ignore. They realized that their reputation was now inextricably linked to a woman who had lied about her reach, her finances, and her integrity. The board chair turned to the final section of the review packet and adjusted her glasses. "We have also received written statements from several former members of the bridal party," she said. "Two of them are present today to answer limited questions about documents and communications they personally received." Rachel and Aaron entered the conference room together. Neither woman looked at Kylie as they took the two empty chairs near the door. They had not come to make speeches or relive every painful detail in front of strangers. They had come to verify facts. The board chair began with Aaron. Aaron unlocked her phone and opened the original bridal group thread. She confirmed the dates, the participants, and the messages Kylie had sent asking the bridesmaids to sign testimonial forms for what she described as a private presentation. Nowhere in the thread had Kylie explained that the statements would be attached to a major grant application or used to support claims about services Women Rise had never provided. Kylie shifted in her seat. They all knew what the organization was about. Aaron looked at the board chair, not at Kylie. We knew she wanted supportive quotes. We did not know she was presenting our personal experiences as verified outcomes of her program. Rachel spoke next. Her voice remained quiet, but every word was clear. She authenticated the limited release bearing her signature and explained that she had authorized an anonymous account for an internal workshop. She had never approved the use of her full name, photograph, or the detailed description of the night she escaped her former partner. "And did Kylie personally coordinate your departure that night?" the board chair asked. "No," Rachel said. "She was the first person I called. She chose not to come." For the first time since the meeting began, Kylie lost control of her expression. Evan joined the session by secure video call. He authenticated the email, instructing him to keep me away from Denise until the grant paperwork cleared. He admitted that, at the time, he had believed Kylie was only trying to prevent tension between two sisters. "You knew exactly what Claire would say," he told her. "That is why you wanted her kept away." Kylie leaned toward the screen. "You are a coward and a traitor." She began talking over him, then over the board chair, accusing everyone in the room of conspiring against her. The chair ended the interview and called a short recess. No one had shouted except Kylie. No one had exaggerated. The records, the statements, and her own reaction had done the work for them. By the time the board members left the table, the image of Kylie as a disciplined nonprofit leader had collapsed completely. The myth of the visionary leader had been dismantled, piece by piece, until only the truth remained. Months of document review, investigator interviews, financial analysis, and plea negotiations followed the board session. My sister eventually entered into a plea agreement to avoid a protracted trial that would have exposed every detail of her life to the public eye. She avoided an extended prison sentence by agreeing to full restitution, a permanent ban from managing any nonprofit finances, and a requirement to issue public corrections to every foundation she had defrauded. I stood in the back of the courtroom for the final plea hearing, watching as she was forced to admit her actions under oath. The judge leaned forward, his gaze stern. "Do you understand that by entering this plea, you are acknowledging the factual basis of these charges?" Kylie stood rigid, her hair pulled back tightly, her face stripped of the makeup she usually wore like armor. She looked toward the gallery and caught my eye for a fleeting moment, a look of pure, desperate realization crossing her features. For the first time in her life, She could not call a lie family business and expect me to clean it up. Yes, she whispered, her voice sounding small and brittle in the vast courtroom. I understand. I walked out of the courthouse and into the cool air of a July afternoon. I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, but instead, I felt a quiet, hollow peace. The restitution was being processed, and the foundation records were being updated. My sister was a first-time offender facing the consequences of a life built on shortcuts, and I was simply Claire. I was the executive director of a center that was finally doing its work, without the shadow of a fraudulent sister looming over us. I stopped at the corner, waiting for the light to change. My phone sat silent in my bag, free from the endless notifications, the frantic pleas of my father, and the manufactured crises. I realized then that the revenge I had sought was not found in the courtroom or the judge's ruling. It was found in the fact that I had not needed her downfall to validate my own worth. I had built a life, a career, and a set of boundaries that were entirely mine, and no amount of fraud or deception could take that away. I crossed the street, walking toward a small park where the afternoon sun was filtering through the trees. I took a deep breath, the air clean and light. I was not the sister who had to fix everything. I was just a woman who had finally learned that the most important house to protect was my own. The sentencing hearing took place in the same courtroom where the plea had been entered, just a few days before the anniversary of that disastrous wedding. The judge, a woman known for her strict adherence to financial integrity, listened intently as the final restitution calculations were presented. The total amount reached $63,400. My sister sat at the defense table, looking much smaller than she ever had in the past. The sentence was clear and unforgiving: 90 days of custodial time, followed by 9 months of home detention, and 4 years of supervised probation. She was also permanently barred from holding any fiduciary or leadership role in a nonprofit organization. The judge required her to issue public written corrections to every foundation she had defrauded, setting the record straight regarding the fake partnership with Harbor Light. I watched from the gallery as the bailiff led her away. She did not look back. There was no theatrical breakdown or plea for forgiveness. There was only the quiet, heavy reality of a life that had finally met its logical conclusion. By the time the criminal case and restitution process wound down, her apartment in the city was gone, and the luxury car she had leased was long repossessed. Every piece of high-end clothing and every piece of jewelry she had used to build her fragile image had been sold to cover the restitution payments. Evan had taken back the family ring the moment the wedding was called off, and her friend group, those women she had treated as mere accessories, had completely dissolved. They were no longer speaking to Kylie. They did not become my followers or spend every day discussing what had happened, but the friendships we had built outside her influence remained intact. Each woman returned to her own life, finally free to decide what relationship she wanted with me. My father called me later that evening, his voice trembling with a mixture of grief and misplaced indignation. "The jail time is too much, Claire," he said, the old familiar weight of his own helplessness filling the line. "You have to tell the prosecutor that it was a mistake. If you pay the remaining balance of the restitution for her, she could avoid the custodial time. Just help her one last time." I looked out the window of my office, watching the sunset cast long shadows over the parking lot. "I cannot pay for a lesson she is meant to learn herself, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I have already arranged a list of financial counseling services and professional support for her, but I am done cleaning up the mess." "You are being cruel," he whispered. "I am being a daughter," I replied. "But I am no longer her parent." The next morning, I called a locksmith and changed the front door lock. Then I emailed Daniel to tell him that the key he still carried would no longer open my home. It was a small, final boundary. I had offered him resources, but I had officially removed his access to the life I had built. It was a small, final boundary. I had provided resources, but I had officially removed my responsibility for his rescue. The following week, Harbor Light finally celebrated the opening of our new transitional housing wing. We had secured the grants through legitimate applications and independent board oversight. We named the main living area the open door room. I walked into the space, the walls painted a soft, calming shade of blue, and saw a simple glass display case mounted near the entrance. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was the brass key Rachel had carried on her keychain for 3 years. Beside it, a small plaque carried a single line about the right to live in a place where one does not have to be afraid. Rachel had come to me a week earlier, asking if she could donate the key to the center. I had hesitated, asking her if she was doing it because she felt she still owed me a debt for the night I had driven her to safety. She had laughed, a sound that was finally free of any lingering fear, and told me that she wanted to give it because she knew exactly what it felt like to be on the other side of that door. She was no longer a victim seeking rescue. She was an advisor for survivor privacy, a woman who had built her own life after the wreckage. Erin helped us organize the educational programs for the residents, and Natalie provided the floral arrangements at cost, using a contract that was completely transparent. Monica and Whitney volunteered their time, not out of any obligation to me, but because they believed in the work. They were no longer props for a brand. They were individuals who had chosen a path of integrity. I stood in the hallway as the building began to fill, with the quiet, productive energy of people settling into a new start. My work was not about revenge, and it was not about watching my sister fall. It was about creating something that could stand on its own, something that didn't require me to sacrifice my own future to keep it upright. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the hallway in a warm, amber glow. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a missed call from my father, but I silenced it without looking. I did not need to know what he was upset about, and I did not need to hear another plea to save a woman who had never once asked to be saved. I stepped into my office and pulled the door shut behind me, the lock clicking into place with a satisfying, final sound. The open door room remained open for the residents who needed it, offering them a safe place to land. As I packed my bag and prepared to leave, I realized that I had finally reclaimed the most important house of all. I walked out to my car, the evening air feeling cool and light against my skin. For the first time, I left a door open for someone who needed it, and closed every door that had only ever needed me to disappear. You may have spent years believing that your value is tied to how much you can endure for those you love, but you must realize that setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty, it is an act of survival. Protecting yourself from someone who treats you like an accessory is not about seeking revenge, but about reclaiming the life that belongs solely to you. True loyalty should never require you to set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm. When you stop cleaning up the messes left by people who refuse to grow, you finally create the space necessary to build something lasting and real. It is time to stop being the silent anchor for a family that expects you to drown. You deserve a life defined by your own choices, rather than the crises of others. If you have ever felt like you were just a prop in someone else's performance, how did you finally decide to walk off the stage and claim your own voice?